would like to introduce Christina Fazio, and she is the Disaster Services Director for the Medina County Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. And I know that there's an acronym in there somewhere, right, Christina? Oh, we've got you muted. We got to unmute you.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. So, anyway, so just a brief introduction about Christina and the Emergency Management Association, the EMA. She'll tell you a little bit more about it, but it's the Medina County Emergency Management is a local government agency that provides support and coordinated assistance to local communities and first responders for county-wide emergency and disaster planning, education, warning, response, and recovery activities. So that's a big job. The agency is one of 17 county departments governed by a board, and this is important, it's not governed by the county commissioners. So the structure is a little bit different. Christina actually started with the agency in 2000, so 20 years ago, right? As an administrative assistant. And she learned about the emergency management and gained an appreciation for the agency's role with Medina County. She was promoted to emergency management specialist in 2002, so 2 years later, and deputy director in 2004, so 4 years later. In 2011, she was appointed the director and is only the second director for the agency since emergency management came into Medina County in 1989. We're dating ourselves, aren't we? Over the years, she gained an understanding of grant writing and has been very successful with bringing approximately $12 million in revenue back to the county for planning, equipment, and training. In 2011, Christina initiated the restructuring of the Medina County All Hazards Team, operated by the Medina County Fire Chiefs Association as a subcommittee of the Medina County Emergency Management Executive Board. She has an associate's degree in emergency management planning and administration, an associate degree in commercial art and advertising, and is also an Ohio certified emergency manager. She's been a resident of Litchfield Township since 1997, and she serves as the Litchfield Township Zoning Secretary and was recently appointed the executive director of our Medina Blue Coats. So I will turn this over to Christina, and she can tell you a little bit more about the agency and what they do. And then, Christina, when you're ready, I will go ahead and share the screen, and we'll start the presentation.
Okay. Well, I appreciate being asked to do this Zoom Lunch and Learn. So, such a bizarre scenarios that we've had going on in the last number of months. So besides the COVID incident at EMA, we have a lot of other things that go on too. So this is unusual. It's comfortable being at home. I can say that I've enjoyed this, but just be warned that I have 4 dogs, and if they see a squirrel running in the window, I might have to hit mute super quick so that you guys don't hear the 4 dogs barking. But so I'll apologize in advance if that's something that happens. But so it's always funny to me when somebody asks for a bio, because when I hear Terry read that bio, I think, wow, that's kind of cool stuff that person did. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I did that stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I like emergency management so much and why I've been here for 20 years is because there are so many different things that EMA can touch. And in Medina County, because we're governed by a board, we have great flexibility, and the board allows us to do a variety of different things and kind of gives me the freedom to take on projects that a lot of EMAs don't do. So it's great that we're governed by a board. The Ohio Revised Code dictates who sits on our board. So that simplifies that decision making. But when you're governed by a board and you have that sector of government representation and a citizen at large, the projects that you do, the projects that we oversee, that's the reason why I think we have such a variety of projects. Is, can you imagine being governed by 3 county commissioners that might have a more narrow scope of what they would like an agency's projects to be? So that's what makes the the agency is so interesting. I've never had a job where I've been at it for longer than 5 or 6 years, not because I've not liked the job, but because you've grown to understand the job completely. And then I couldn't imagine being in that job for another 25 years, never having the opportunity for growth. So that right there is the main reason why I've stayed with the agency for the 20 years. So, to go on with the presentation, just so that I keep myself organized, because there's so many different things we can talk about with emergency management. I can talk for 8 hours and just go in various different directions. And I don't want to do that. I want to try and make sure that I stay focused to the slides. So with the presentation, when I go to the introduction slide, and I say that every resident is a critical team member, the truth is that you, as a resident and or business owner, you are, in a roundabout way, an emergency manager, because you understand the risks that are associated with your home, and you understand the risks that are associated with your business, and the different mitigation measures that you put in place by having proper insurance, for example, that makes you a roundabout an emergency manager. So I don't know if we want to do introductions, or if you want to not do that and just keep going on with the slides. Do we want to introduce the other participants?
You know, just because there's so many, I think, Christine, and I know you've got a lot to cover, let's just go ahead and move forward.
Okay. So emergency management has existed for quite a long time, and maybe in a future presentation, I can go over the history of emergency management, because that is incredibly interesting. Emergency management started off with the bucket brigade. If anybody's ever heard of the bucket brigade, that was way back in the day when the small towns were, the small towns that existed back then in the 1800s, if there was a fire in one of the buildings, the bucket brigade was the residents and the business owners literally carrying buckets of water and passing them on to each other in order to throw buckets of water on the business or the building that was on fire. That's the start of emergency management. So, and then to follow the history from those first bucket brigades, and how events through the nation drove emergency management and defined it more, and then through the different pieces of legislation, how they were created and then morphed and changed through the different presidents. All of that stuff is very, very interesting. So maybe we'll touch on that in another time. But emergency management was established we'll go past this disclaimer, Terry. There we go. We'll go past that. You guys, like I said, you guys are critical team members with making sure that you have all the individual insurances, for example. So those will be the goals for today that we can cover, just and have you guys have some basic understanding of just these 5 things. If you look at number 4, it's not that it's a typo, but I failed to make a correction. And don't let me forget to explain understanding ECC role, because that's in a future slide. And go to the next slide. Okay, so emergency management, as we understand it today, a little bit, started as civil defense in 1950. So if anybody remembers commercials from the 1960s where it was the duck and cover. Does anybody remember those black and white commercials? That'll be something that I can include in a future presentation too. But emergency management, before it was deemed emergency management that we know it today, was really civil defense. So for preparation for nuclear attacks. And then in Medina County, emergency management changed from the idea of civil defense in 1989 to be emergency management that we know of today. So after the events of 9/11 is when emergency management, there weren't even degrees in emergency management before the 9/11 attacks. So in the last 20 years, almost 20 years, emergency management has grown immensely. Programs are so different between colleges and universities. And I can say that there probably isn't yet a well-defined national layout for what emergency management looks like in the educational institutions. So 2-year degrees or 4-year degrees, they're all very different. So emergency management just keeps evolving because risks and events that take place from year to year are always evolving, and emergency management has to try and figure out how to keep up with that. So next slide. So I think a couple of years ago, even the health department, we would do silly little mock scenarios, and we oftentimes were doing mock scenarios to prepare for the zombie eclipse. So you have people that are the doomsdayers, and I guess we can be considered doomsdayers or preppers. So that was just a silly slide of two people. You have two different groups of people. You're either preparing for a zombie eclipse or you're living through it. Two kinds of people in the world who plan for a zombie eclipse and those who don't. So we're all people that are preparing for a zombie eclipse or a international pandemic, we'll say. Next slide. So the different levels of emergency management, oftentimes what people ask me is, what is EMA? And the easiest way, because the definition is just not a simple definition, it's not a single sentence or 2 sentences. If I just tell people that we're local FEMA, people go, oh, okay, I understand what that is, because you hear about FEMA all the time. If you hear about it on the news or the president's press conferences, you'll hear about FEMA. So we're a little bit different with, we still do planning, but FEMA oftentimes in their normal operation, they're office people, and state EMA, more so office people. But your local county EMAs are, yes, we're office people, but we're also field people. So EMAs from county to county, 88 counties in the state of Ohio, you have some EMAs that we're not considered responders. So, so you have the FEMA personnel that oftentimes for a tsunami or a hurricane response, when you know and you hear that FEMA is out in the field, they're actually not FEMA, direct FEMA employees. They're actually subcontractors. So you and I, depending on what your level of training can be, you can be a FEMA responder to go out and assist a community after a major disaster. But most EMA personnel are, again, office people. They're writing plans, they're coordinating meetings, they're helping to coordinate training. They aren't people that are out in the field interacting day to day. And in Medina County, we have 3 full-time people. We are field people. So we do that office work and do that office planning, but we do interact. We go to the police chiefs meetings, the fire chiefs meetings. We're integrated into the community, and we do respond. So if there is some kind of, even just a small scale incident that's going on, if somebody needs emergency management, even though we are not defined as responders, because of what we do and our program is so robust, what we offer to the communities in Medina County, us going out and actually physically being at an incident is absolutely something that is part of our program. Again, not something that all counties do, but we do that in Medina County. So next slide. So the only thing that EMAs in emergency management and having a director is a requirement of every county. The director doesn't even have to be a full-time director, but under the Ohio Revised Code 5502, the one thing that is the requirement of every county is that they have to have a county-wide emergency operations plan. So again, counties can accomplish that with just the part-time director, but that's the only requirement of EMAs. All of the other things that EMAs do are driven by community needs. So When I first started at EMA in 2000, for 9 years, I worked on property buyouts in Glory Glens and Chippewa Lake. So if anybody's familiar with the kind of flooding that would happen down there, over the course of 9 years and 4 different grants, I worked on buying out 24 repetitive flood properties. They were bought out through FEMA programs or state programs. So you won't see probably most other EMAs doing property buyouts, and then the demolition, the coordination of the demolition. You won't see EMAs doing that. So all these other things that our Medina County EMA does is in addition to what this one single requirement is. So it's kind of crazy that emergency management, with the important role that we do, I guess we've made ourselves important by all the things that we've done in Medina County, but the idea that the only thing that EMAs in the state of Ohio have to do is have this emergency operations plan, it's really not. It's a big job. Having that plan is a big job, but there's no way that that's a full-time position for somebody. So the idea that you make yourself more relevant by integrating yourself into the communities with all these different projects is just what we've done over the last 20 years, 25 years. So 5502.27. So that's how we're formed in Medina County. 5502.27 lays out who your board members are. And it talks about all the communities, and we have 26 political subdivisions in Medina County that pay into our EMA, and the 26 is the county. So they all pay into an annual cost allocation that helps us with our budget. So currently, all the communities in Medina County pay us $138,000. And that means that we do all of their planning for them. So our EOP covers what they would normally have to have as an individual township, city, or village EOP. And then we do mitigation planning, volunteer resource planning, disaster management, donations management, our mitigation plan, then paying into the countywide EMA. Every plan that we do within our county agency then covers all of those political subdivisions. And the reason why that's relevant is because say the city of Brunswick, if they have a tornado that goes through and they have significant enough damage that they would be eligible to receive state assistance, funding assistance, without that countywide EOP or the additional plans that we do on their behalf, without them having approved plans that we facilitate, they wouldn't be eligible for disaster reimbursement funds. So the idea that we do those plans on behalf of all the communities allows them to be eligible then for any state or federal assistance that comes from some kind of a disaster, man-made or a natural event. Next slide. So the Robert T. Stafford Act is the act that drives what emergency management looks like just for from the EOP perspective nationwide. So in all of the states nationwide, the idea that municipalities, counties, cities, villages, however it is that they do it in the individual states, the EOP is something that's a requirement. So the Stafford Act of 1988 is the amended version of a Disaster Relief Act from 1974. So again, the history starting from that bucket brigade and how these different acts and disaster assistance have morphed through the years is just really, really amazing and interesting. I think that probably this COVID Act is going to end up creating some kind of piece of legislation that then drives what response looks like for this international pandemic, because in all honesty, the nationwide response is a little bit lacking, but that's probably another conversation too. So okay, so the slide mentions the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross has the national charter for doing shelter management nationwide. It doesn't mean that communities have to use the Red Cross. It just means that they are our go-to if that's who we choose, and then they receive national funding for them to hold that national charter for sheltering. Okay, next slide. So Again, 5502, Ohio Revised Code dictates how emergency managements look like in all 88 counties. And then it lays out what the what the law looks like for ensuring that you have protection for doing work on behalf of the community. And then that covers also for our volunteers. We have a very robust group of volunteers between EMA and the health department. We have CERT volunteers and then ham radio operators. And then the health department has MRC or Medical Reserve Corps. That legal protection also covers our registered volunteers to do work on our behalf through a disaster recovery process. Next slide. You know what, let's go back at it because I put in red. Go back to that other slide. So when I talk about the title, what is emergency management in Ohio, because it differs from state to state. What's really interesting is that I'm on a couple of Facebook forums that are actually worldwide, and you'll have some EMAs in different states fall under the fire department, or they might fall under the sheriff's office. They might fall under a police department. And it's always interesting, and you'll have some EMAs that actually oversee EMS. We're oftentimes confused with EMS. So emergency management agency or emergency medical service, right? EMS, EMTs. A lot of times in these Facebook forums, they don't understand my question or my answer, and I don't understand their question and their answer, because in their state, their EMA falls under a different department. And one of the reasons why EMAs falling under the board structure is that, could you imagine, emergency management should be always a neutral entity. We service and help anybody. Somebody needs help, we go out and we're helping. It doesn't matter if it's a large scale incident, we're going out and helping residents. If there is some kind of a large response that's a public safety response, we're out there helping fire, police, and EMS. So the idea that an EMA might fall under a fire department, it means that their program and their focus is going to be more fire driven. You have an EMA that falls under a sheriff. Their EMA program then is going to be more law enforcement driven. It's difficult for those programs that fall under a specific discipline. It would be difficult for them to have an unbiased perspective, because when they fall under that specific structure, then their focus is going to be what the focus of that structure is, if that makes sense. So when you have EMA, again, and then for us to not be governed by the county commissioners or a county executive, the idea that you have 8 people that make up a board of mayors, township trustees, the commissioners do have a role on our board, but you're able to have that broad perspective. We have fire and police, and then again, that citizen at large. So that's why for me, that was relevant to point out, is that from state to state, it is different, and who they report to or who they fall under. So next slide. Next slide, Terry. Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, so let's see. Slide 11. There we go. So I think that I might have touched on one more. There we go. Okay. So I think I talked a little bit about that. We talked about the EOP on that previous slide. So some of the emergency management activities that we do, and there is never going to be a slide that's an all-encompassing slide of this is what EMA in Medina County does, because golly, I just couldn't capture it all. So community outreach is always with our social media or us interacting and going to different meetings, me participating in this lunch and learn, the idea that I want to educate people for them to understand what EMA does. And then for them to understand what EMA doesn't do is also part of our community outreach. Again, emergency plans. We'll talk a little bit about LEPC and exercises. In order for us to do a good emergency operations plan, a county EOP, we also do annually a hazards analysis. So a hazards analysis looks at all of the risk or the majority of risks that we might see in the county. And then we do exercises and planning driven to those higher risks. So in the state of Ohio, flooding is our #1 risk. Our county hazards analysis is always going to show flooding as our #1 risk also. So we try to do some mitigation programs that then addresses what your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top hazards are that come from your hazards analysis. And then that THIRA is, when Terry said the acronyms, there's 75 pages of FEMA acronyms. It's really kind of crazy, but a THIRA is a hazards and risk analysis is what that stands for. And that's a state prepared hazards analysis that's a little bit more formal than what our county hazards analysis is. Site planning and hazmat modeling, we'll get into that too when we do talk about LEPC. Training we're always doing, hazard management and grants. I love grants. I absolutely, I've grown to have an appreciation for grants because we are 70% grant supported. We would not be able to have the program that we have if it weren't for grants and successful grant writing. Resource management, that's the main thing that we've been doing even through this COVID event. And I can talk a little bit more about that. And then response and damage assessment. So even during this COVID event, when we had the tornadoes come through the county, what was it, maybe 2 months ago, we were out on the street in the field doing damage assessment and actually reporting back and taking photos and drone photos of what that damage looks like, because we want to try and meet certain damage thresholds so that we can try and get the state to support us financially and assist residents and or businesses get themselves back to normal with funding that would help them, put their house back together or put their roof back on, or businesses, put their place back together. So those are some of the main activities that we are doing all the time. Next slide. So again, our #1 hazard based on our hazards analysis and our THIRA is flooding. But these are things that we are always preparing for. Flooding, tornado, snowstorm, ice storm, pandemic, bioterrorism, fire, and hazmat. So we have had, in the 20 years that I've been at EMA, we have had either gubernatorial declarations and or presidential declarations based on all of those incidents that you see across the top of that slide. Next slide. So when I say that residents can be considered emergency managers, first responders are actually also considered emergency managers. So you have a motor vehicle accident, that first engine that arrives at that MVA, that guy is an emergency manager. What he's doing is he's standing back, he is assessing what that scene looks like, and he's quickly rolling through his mind what the next resources are that he needs. Does he need an engine? How many more people does he need? Does he think that he needs mutual aid from a neighboring department because this MVA is bad enough that he knows his local resources are not going to meet the needs of this MVA? He's going to have to call, again, we'll just use Brunswick City as an example. Brunswick City has, their resources they don't have enough resources to manage an MVA that has 10 cars involved with the MVA. He knows that he's going to have to call mutual aid from Valley City Fire Department and Brunswick Hills Fire Department, for example. So that makes him, the idea that you do that first on scene is the emergency manager. What you're doing as that emergency manager is looking at what's in front of you and determining if your resources that you have right at your fingertips are going to meet the needs to mitigate this incident, or do you have to call on your neighbors to bring in their resources to help you mitigate the incident also. So LEPC, besides emergency management, we also do local emergency planning. That's local emergency planning committee. This is a program that is only for county commissioners. And in Medina County, they've given EMA this charge of doing LEPC. So LEPC is the organization that, so 80% of our program is emergency management, about 20% of our program is LEPC. So you can read through that slide and get a basic understanding of why LEPCs exist. It's from a major incident that happened some years ago, the Bhopal incident, it's called. It was a chemical release in a huge factory, and it killed and injured a large group of people. So from that incident, it was realized that these businesses that have these extremely hazardous substances needed to have some kind of oversight and reporting of what chemicals are in their facilities. And that's where LEPCs come from. So all of the businesses, and it makes sense that EMAs oversee and coordinate LEPC activities. So the LEPC plan that falls under this requirement is our hazmat plan. So LEPCs in all 88 counties, they receive all of the chemical inventories of the businesses in the county. And there's actually a small booklet that says what the reportable chemicals are and then what quantities they have to report. So there's some businesses in the county that might have 5 gallons of a chemical. You're thinking, gosh, 5 gallons, that's really not a lot. But if it were to be released or if it would get into a waterway, what it does, the aftermath of the release, if it creates some kind of a plume because it reacts with water, might have to have an evacuation zone of like 5 miles. So that 5 gallons of stuff that's at XYZ business is reported to us, because then we do in our hazmat plan, we do worst case scenario plume modeling, it's called. And we have 2 different software packages that will use this chemical, will put in what that release would look like if it's all 5 gallons that were to accidentally get released. Say the container falls over, the lid isn't put on properly. Say that it's a very dense chemical and somebody has to pick it up with a tow motor to move it, and then it falls off of the tow motor, and all of a sudden it's in the environment or in a drain. When we do plume modeling, we take into consideration daytime, nighttime, what the weather is like. Is it a beautiful sunny day? Is it rainy out? And those different outside environmental, whatever's going on that particular day is gonna dictate what that exposure might look like, what that plume, what that smoke release is gonna look like. And then that tells us, that plume model tells us what an evacuation zone may look like. So that's all part of our hazmat plan. And then that hazmat plan becomes part of and a partner with our emergency operations plan. So if you have a large chemical release and you have to do a large evacuation, is it in a residential area? Is it in Medina City? Our churches are in the vicinity of the evacuation zone? Is there a nursing home? Are there daycares? Is it Medina City School? So the idea that that hazmat plan is well integrated with your countywide emergency operations plan totally makes sense. That's why EMAs are usually the ones that oversee LEPC, because what that hazmat response looks like is then laid out in your emergency operations plan. Who has what role? Who's doing traffic control and access? Who's the department bringing the water in order to try and bring the plume down, different scenarios. So LEPC information is not only sent to EMAs, they're sent to fire departments, local fire departments. And that's relevant because the fire departments then can ensure that they have the proper personal protective equipment, or PPE, that if that business had some kind of release, the fire departments are well prepared to know what kind of PPE they need on hand in order to respond. And then that reporting also goes to the state, that the State Emergency Response Commission is then that parent overarching authority, or that structure for ensuring that businesses are complying with the reporting requirements. So when I go back to the emergency operations plan, it's written in a format that there are 14 different things that are always going to happen. I don't know if I have that slide in there actually, and I probably should have. So in an EOP, yeah, okay. So in that EOP, you see the one bullet point, ESF 1, transportation, ESF 2, communications. There are 14 things that are always going to happen for a large scale incident. So, well, I say always going to happen. If it's a big enough incident, there are 14 things that are always going to happen. Maybe in a medium-sized incident, transportation might be irrelevant, but communications is always going to be relevant. Incident command is always going to be relevant. Traffic control and access is always going to be relevant. So these ESFs are laid out in a way that everybody always knows who does traffic control and access. Law enforcement does. So who is the primary agency? It's always law enforcement. And then within that ESF, it also lays out who the support, what departments are additional support for that primary responsibility. So EMA is going to help law enforcement do the ESF that oversees traffic control and access.
Hey, Christina,
So again,
we've got about 5 minutes left, and then we want to open
no.
up.
So let's go
Okay?
through. Let's go to
I
the
know.
next. See,
Okay.
these are never long enough. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Let's see. Was that the last slide?
No.
So, so the next slide, local EMA activation considerations, easy enough for everybody to browse over that stuff on your own time then and see local jurisdictions, resources available. Again, different ways that we're able to bring in resources. If we don't have the resources in Medina County, one of the things that EMAs do is we have mutual aid agreements between EMAs, county to county, and then the state also has that from state to state. So that's how states are able to assist other states in, again, like a hurricane response or as an example. And then elected officials. I can't declare an emergency. I would have to prompt the county commissioners. There's only 2 entities in counties that can declare a local emergency, and that's the county commissioners and or the health commissioner. So the health commissioner can declare a health emergency. County commissioners can declare an emergency. And what that does is if the emergency ends up being large enough, again, it would allow for resources to come in, and those resources can get reimbursed for their the money out of pocket for them to come in and help Medina County. And then in order for a county to have a gubernatorial or a governor's declaration, then opening state money, the county would have to have an emergency declaration. And then depending on the scale of the incident, all of those county declarations that then prompt that gubernatorial or governor's declaration, all of those governor declarations would then prompt the president to have his presidential declaration and then open FEMA dollars. Local jurisdictions, what's the next slide for this? So again, the next slide, slide 19, is just the framework for local responders responding, asking for mutual aid, bringing in regional teams that might be from another county, county response, state response, and federal response. And then the same holds true for the next slide. It's just kind of what that line looks like. Emergencies start from the bottom up. They never start from the top down, except when you have an international pandemic. Everything was completely reversed. So the idea that you had a presidential declaration, nothing that we did locally prompted that. He did that on his own, and then we all followed suit after the fact. Completely outside of the 20 years of learning and any of the training that I've ever been a part of. In order for you to get state or federal assistance, you're pushing it up from the bottom, again, not from the top down. So I'll leave the rest of the slides for everybody to read, but it's so difficult to talk about what we do in just an hour's time because there's just so much to talk about. I would love to talk about specific projects even, but that then go off of what these slides are. It's for people to understand in more detail, but there's just so much to it all. So
yeah, it's probably actually a good place for us to go over to the chat box and look at some of the questions, because I saw you had a question on the slide there about the pandemic, and you knew that these questions were going to come, right, Christina?
yeah, absolutely.
Our current situation. So Don Wright has a couple questions in here. He wants to know, do volunteers have protection when donating time and resources?
Absolutely. So with the MRC and then our CERT, so MRC again is Medical Reserve Corps, that falls under the health department, and then our CERT team, Citizens Emergency Response Team, it is a formal structure that CERT members are our volunteers. They actually are part of the statewide database. So when you go through your CERT training and you become a volunteer for us and you fulfill all the training requirements, you are then registered with the state of Ohio as well. So you are in their database. What happens is, for liability insurance from the state, that is when there is a declared disaster. There's a declared emergency. Otherwise, when you help us day to day, say, for example, this morning, we had CERT volunteers assist with feeding Medina County, you fall under our liability insurance. So all of our CERT and ham radio operators, their information, social security number, are part of the county's database through us, and then you fall under us if something were to happen. We always want people, and so the liabilities are whatever those threshold coverages are, but yes, you're not out there just kind of loosely on your own. You do fall under the county insurance and or state insurance, depending on the scenario.
Great, thank you. And now Jeff is asking, and you knew this one was going to come, Christina, but what has been Medina's EMA role, the planning and execution in the pandemic and protests?
Okay.
Currently.
So for the pandemic, the main thing, again, that EMAs do, because we're not supposed to be field people so much, but we are resource and coordination. And at the start of this, when we realized across the nation, worldwide, you realize that there was not enough PPE and 95 masks, for example. We don't stockpile things locally. We don't have the budget for it. We don't have warehouse space. So the fire departments, for example, when they realize that if they need to transport potentially infected patients from their residence to the hospital, they eventually are going to run out of the PPE that they need in order to do that safely for their personnel. So one of the things that we do is we coordinate with the state of Ohio. So the state EOC, we have our countywide EOC, which is virtual right now, but the state EOC then is activated, and any of our countywide needs then get pushed to the state of Ohio, and the state of Ohio helps us fill those countywide needs. So with the start of this, we have been meeting religiously for the last 3 months on either daily or every other day conference calls with the state of Ohio. They keep us abreast of what they're doing resource-wise with fulfilling our needs. And then, so the PPE is the main thing that we've been doing, receiving PPE, understanding the needs locally, what their PPE needs are locally, trying to fill those needs locally, and or pushing those need requests to the state of Ohio, and then the state of Ohio helps us to fill those needs, and then we push those resources that we receive from the state of Ohio back out to the communities. So every week for almost the last 3 months, we are receiving pallets of PPE that are helping with our fire departments, the tier 1 fire departments, healthcare providers. We've been giving our dentists, once they were able to open, our nursing homes, assisting the health department with hotspot mitigation. The amount of meetings that we've had with understanding surge planning with our community hospitals, understanding what patient movement might look like, their PPE needs. There's a lot to it, but for the most part, resources and coordination, and it's been receiving donations and then doing those PPE deliveries for those healthcare or those tiered users of what that PPE is. Does that answer his question?
It sounds like it, yeah.
Okay.
So thank you.
He can say no.
Does that answer your question, Jeff? think it did.
Okay.
Okay, I have another question here from Gary. He wants to know, are you notified when highly hazardous / nuclear items are transported through the county on trains?
Yes. Yes. And you know what? I didn't answer the riot question. I'll go back to the riot question. We're always, yeah, so we are on call. I've been on call for 20 years of my life now, 24/7, 365. So while we were not right there in Medina City, for example, for the riots, we have a mobile command vehicle that serves as an incident command post that has every radio frequency, not only in Medina County, but our surrounding counties. We're always ready and available to go and assist. So we were not integrated in what that planning looked like, but they know that we're always available to come and assist if something were to get a little out of hand. So, and then oftentimes the National Guard for an incident like that, even though, again, the governor has pushed National Guard resources out into the communities already, a request for something like the National Guard would go through EMAs to the state of Ohio. So, and then, so the other question was, so we get notification of extremely dangerous radioactive, for example, anything hazardous traveling through the county, we are made aware of that in enough time that we make sure that the people in the county that need to know of that know about that. So those are those kinds of issues that you keep close to you, because that's information that you don't want the wrong people to know about. So so yeah, we are made aware of those things, and they're often railroad. A lot of times that's how that stuff is transported, is via rail. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, a couple more questions. Don wants to know, what kind of volunteers or expertise do you need locally? And do you need architects to assess structures during emergencies?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. There is a specific skill that we couldn't ever use. We need, oftentimes, just having people that can answer phones or run documents from one place to another. It's all so relevant, but having subject matter experts that can go out and assist us with damage assessment, for example, to have people that would be on our team that can help me understand, when I go to the state of Ohio and do damage assessment after tornado, those numbers and what our estimation of damages locally is what drives the state of Ohio to say, oh, we're going to send people down and reevaluate what your guesstimate is. I can't do that well necessarily. It does help to have those people be part of our volunteer pool, because they can say that's about $1 million worth of damage. I can then document that, push that up to the state of Ohio, and those numbers are what drive them, the state of Ohio, to push money back to us for mitigation. So yes, absolutely.
Sounds like you might want to connect with Don.
Yes.
Because Don works for Rulin, who's an architectural company. I think that's where that question came out. So thank you, Don.
Yes.
Again, just a reminder, I've got one more question, but if anybody else has questions, feel free to put those in the chat box, and we'll see if we can get Christina to answer before we shut down. Okay. So let's see here. Jeff has another question. He said, how can someone become a FEMA responder? Good question.
You can become a FEMA responder by going to either ready.gov. I'll find the exact link. And if we want to send that out, I don't know the exact link, but you would register and then fill out their application process. So oftentimes when you are a FEMA responder, you're going out to a location for 4 and 5 weeks at a time. So you would be responsible for your own housing. They end up giving you a check after it's all said and done, but you're essentially a subcontractor for them. But I can send Terry the link for that and then get that to you.
Actually, what do you know what the link is, or you said you have to look it up?
I'd have to look. Yeah, I'd have to look it up.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So that was, I think those are all the questions. Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask? Just put them in the chat box, because I mean, as you guys can see, I mean, what Christina does over there, I mean, those slides were pretty thorough, and there's 3 people. Didn't you say 3 people in your office plus
people.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of work for 4 people running
One of the
around.
one of the things that have come out of that has come out of this pandemic is the idea of continuity of operations planning. So we always push just our county departments to have continuity of operation plans. And what does it look like? So just imagine a dispatch center. If they were not able to function in their building, how would they still, because it's an essential function, how would that dispatch center still function as a dispatch center if they were taken out of their comfort zone and put someplace else? So like our mobile command vehicle has a 3-station dispatch. It can serve as an uncomfortable dispatch center, but that is what's in place for continuity of operations. So continuity of government. I think that a lot of times continuity of business, people kind of, yeah, I don't know, what are the chances of me ever not operating my business? Or what are the chances of, look at you and I and Colleen operating remotely? So those are things that I hope out of this pandemic, along with a number of other things, that continuity of business, continuity of government, continuity of operations is something that people start taking more serious. So I've had people ask me, how has this impacted your budget? Are you going to have to spend money doing anything? No. EMA understands what continuity of business looks like. And we just ended up operating out of our house. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be able to function. If it's out in the middle of a cornfield, I'm supposed to provide my essential service to my community regardless. And I shouldn't have to do any kind of immense preparation in advance. There should not be a hiccup in what I can provide to the county and the residents. So that kind of, I think is something, those are the questions I was kind of expecting, seeing that there's business owners. So hopefully if something that you take away as a business owner, consider what your continuity of business plans might look like, so that if there was any kind of major disruption again, things might go a little bit, if they were difficult, things might go a little bit more seamlessly for them in the future. So continuity of government, holy schmoly. I think that there's a lot of lessons learned with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I do have 2 more questions here from Colleen. She wants to know, how does someone volunteer for the MRC, and when was the last time the mobile command responded to an emergency?
The last time, so MRC, you can go to the health department, go to the health department website, just do an easy Medina County Health Department search, and then MRC information is probably going to be right there on their homepage. And then the last time that mobile command went out was maybe a month ago. They went out for it went out for a SWAT call. So a lot of times mobile command goes out. It's just EMA is kind of those, we're the quiet under the radar people. So yeah, so mobile command went out maybe a month ago for a SWAT call out.
Okay. Yeah, great. All right, and I think that's it. So if like I said, we're going to, Christina, thank you very much for all this information. I know that there was more there, and every time we have an opportunity to have you speak, it's just, it's just so interesting. And I know we never get through everything because everybody always has a lot of questions. So thank you very much for taking the time today to do that. And it sounds like the dogs behaved. Right? Those girls.
I appreciate you asking. And I find these to be a little difficult because I want everybody to learn everything in an hour, and it's just not possible. So I think sometimes I stumble over topics because in my head I've got 10 things I want to say, and I can only say one thing at a time, right? So there is just so much to learn. And I realize when I do these how enthusiastic it brings back my enthusiasm, because I love to teach people about what EMA is. So yeah. So I appreciate you asking.
And like you said, it's a big secret, and that's why, when I went to Colleen with this topic, I thought, boy, people want to know about this and they need to know about it. So I knew there were going to be a lot of questions, especially in lieu of everything that's going on today. So again, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
And I will just kind of reiterate that this has been recorded. So we will send this out to everybody after, the lunch and learn today. Later today, you'll get that along with the slides from Christina. And if you have any questions, what is your website, Christina, where they can find
it's just emergency management, MedinaCountyEMA.org. Yep.
Okay, MedinaCountyEMA.org.
Yep.
So if you have any other questions, you can find Christina on there, I would assume, right?
Yep. And then if anybody on social media, if you're on Facebook, find our Facebook page and like our Facebook page and share that with your friends, because oftentimes that's the way that we're pushing information out.
Oh yeah, that's important. That's very important. So are you under the Medina County EMA on
Yep.
Facebook? Is that
Yeah,
what it is?
you can
Okay.
find us that way.
Yeah, that'd be good to follow, especially in times like we're living in today, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Then we'll go ahead and let everybody go and finish off their day. And again, Christina, thank you for your time and everybody for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
To learn more, visit www.leadershipmedinacounty.org.